Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening on this episode of Café New Canadians in partnership with JobStart. New Canadians is a TV and web-based series for newcomers to Canada. You can visit their website at newcanadians.tv or their YouTube channel, where this session is currently being live streamed. Through its digital platforms, New Canadians informs and educates newcomers and immigrants about settlement, education, employment resources and services to help them with their journey here, as well as immigration news and success stories. You can watch New Canadians every week on Omni Television across Canada. Café New Canadians is sponsored by Windmill Microlending. As Canada's largest microlending not-for-profit for skilled immigrants and refugees, Windmill addresses the underemployment of skilled newcomers across Canada by offering low-interest, affordable loans to pay for credentials, licensing, retraining, or professional development. Windmill helps its clients achieve career success and convert potential into prosperity for themselves and for Canada. My name is Daryl Pinto, and I am your host, and will be moderating tonight's topic: Do Canadian employers have a talent or perception gap? I'm really excited to introduce our panelists today. We have four amazing individuals, starting with Dr. Wendy Souquier, who is the founder and academic director at Ryerson's Diversity Institute, Samira Madani, managing director and executive deputy director at World Education Services, Dave Doyen, diversity and inclusion consultant, and Katrina Zhukova, expert in people analytics and talent management. And before we get started, I'm going to pass it over to Jemima Sabapati, who is the Senior Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at JobStart. Over to you, Jemima. Jemima, you're on mute.
Thank you, Daryl, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure today to say a few words about JobStart as we complete 40 years of serving the community. Our primary area of service is employment, and while we serve all job seekers, we also provide some unique customized services to specific groups such as newcomers, persons with disabilities, youth, women, and seniors. We work in collaboration with a wide range of employers, small, medium, and large employers, to support our job seekers in finding and retaining jobs. So with our recent 5-year federal funding, we were able to design and deliver 2 unique programs for newcomers. The first one is Mentoring Pathways to Employment, and the second, Employer Engagement for Immigrant Integration. Through these programs, we support newcomers in acquiring the tools they need to navigate the labor market, to connect them with employers, mentors, and with professional networks. So we have hosted quite a number of networking events and panel discussions with employers from different sectors, such as finance, healthcare, and engineering. And not only did these events focus on getting company insights, but also gave newcomers an opportunity to FaceTime with employers through virtual breakout rooms. And some of these events have given the platform for employers to really meet and talk to this wealth of untapped talent, leading to job offers in some cases. We also involve sectoral experts to reach out to employers from diverse industries to engage them in in-depth dialogues. This helped us to get some understanding of employer perceptions in hiring newcomers, what they saw as challenges in hiring newcomers, company statistics around hiring, job retention, career advancement, wages, etc. And some of our findings or learnings from this led us to today's topic. Do Canadian employers have a talent or perception gap? We do hope the discussion today will also help us JobStart to incorporate some of the learnings and takeaways into our programming, to further educate employers and reduce and dispel some of the myths and perceptions leading to meaningful and sustainable futures for newcomers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jemima. Now, before we get started, I want to remind the audience that this is an interactive event, and I encourage you to type your questions via the Q&A tab on Zoom or the live chat box if you're watching on YouTube. You can also vote for questions submitted by other audience members that you like. The more audience votes a question gets, the more likely that I will punt it to the panelists. All right, so by way of introduction, I'd like to give each of you a turn to tell us what you do briefly, and also a bit about how your current work and experience intersects with professional newcomers. And Wendy, I'm going to get you to start here.
Thanks so much. My name is Wendy Sukier, and I'm a professor at Ryerson University in the Business School. And I lead the Diversity Institute. And the Diversity Institute does a number of things. It's a research center with 100 full-time staff, and we have different areas of work. So we run programs that are focused on entrepreneurs, which include newcomer entrepreneurs. We have programs that focus on future skills, understanding what the barriers are newcomers face. We have programs focused on transitioning people into employment. Some of the programs are specifically targeting highly skilled newcomers, and we do a lot of projects with organizations trying to help them develop processes that make them more welcoming and inclusive. So we work in a number of different areas, and like the majority of Canadians, I'm the daughter of a refugee, so I'm particularly sensitive, I think, to some of the experiences that many newcomers have and how important access to employment is in terms of not only their economic well-being, but also their mental and physical health. So we've been working for a number of years, and we're very interested in how research can help make better policy and practice.
Thanks, Wendy. And I know from the output from the Diversity Institute, you and your team there are doing amazing work, so keep that up. Shamira, how about you?
Sure. So my name is Shamira Madhani. I'm the Managing Director for World Education Services, fondly known as WES. Before I came to WES about 2.5 years ago, I was with the provincial government for almost about 30 years. I started when I was 2, in case you're wondering. In terms of the work that I'm doing now and what work I did in the provincial government, I came to Canada as a young child. I did my high school and university here. What did happen is that we came from East Africa. My parents were entrepreneurs, fairly successful, and my dad had an accounting background. And what I watched as we came here is his inability to get a job, any job, where we could use his professional skills. So he ended up working at a golf club, basically picking up wet towels, cleaning showers and washrooms. And my mom ended up working in a factory. And the roles were completely reversed. And I knew that I wanted to change things. My dad encouraged my sister and myself to go to university and make changes from a systemic perspective. So while I was in government, I basically worked on policies and programs like bridging programs, where we supported individuals instead of taking their whole program again to try and bridge from what they knew to where they're at today. Fact sheets working with universities, colleges. At WES, we basically assess academic credentials of individuals so that they can get their landed status here. But the other work that we do is similar to what I talked about before, is looking at research data, understanding what the issues are. so that we can influence government policy and design innovative programs to try and change the story of doctors driving cabs. We have lots of highly educated individuals in Canada, and we should leverage the skills and get them into the workplace fairly quickly. Canada needs your skills and education.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shamira. Dave, why don't you go next?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Doyen. Bonsoir tout le monde. Je m'appelle Dave Doyen. In my role as a diversity and inclusion consultant, I use a lot of the work produced from research organizations such as Wendy's at the Diversity Institute to better understand the systemic barriers and challenges that different groups may face, and how it is that we can use, what are some of the tools or strategies and actions that we can come up with to address those barriers and challenges, to give everyone a sense of what happens in diversity and inclusion efforts. So if you think about the various ways in which discrimination can show up, whether that be racism, sexism, different forms of harassment and so forth that cause people to feel excluded in the workplace, or may even bar them from getting into a particular workplace. So that's where my work is centered, and some of the things that I get to focus on. So really having an understanding of how it is that someone's identity or background per se may really present some difficulties for them. And as we know, in the case of newcomers, there can be challenges there and discrimination in the process, whether that be on the basis of their accent, it could be their name, and it could very well just sometimes be, a difference in cultural norms and expectations, and helping everyone navigate that process.
Thank you, Dave. And we're going to jump into the meat of what you just said in tonight's discussion for sure. Katrina?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Hi, Daryl. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. So my name is Katerina Zhukova. I have been working for over 16 years in the human resources area, in talent acquisition, talent management, and currently in people analytics as well. I am a trained psychologist in my home country, and here I have shifted to work in human resources and analytics. I am very highly passionate about people not just having jobs, but utilizing their talent and having fulfilling and happy jobs. And I have been coaching and consulting on the side for many years, for over 10 years by now, to help people not just get employed and not just be utilized, but largely to have fulfillment and have goals and aspirations and move forward in life. I'm very much looking forward for this discussion, and thank you, Daryl, for having us all tonight.
Great, thank you. Wendy, I'm going to punt the first question to you. So, newcomers, this is not news to newcomers because they've have lived experience that corroborates the fact that there is a systemic issue as far as accommodating their differences into finding meaningful work. We have some attendees who are not currently in Canada, one from Brazil, I'm sure from elsewhere in the world as well. For those people who are about to enter Canada or wish to enter Canada, is there really a Canadian systemic gap with regards to professional newcomers finding meaningful work? What does your research tell us about that?
There's no question. Highly skilled newcomers are underemployed in Canada. So, on the one hand, you have employers screaming for more highly skilled engineers and computer scientists. And we know that over 40% of newcomer engineers are underemployed. We know that I don't have a family doctor. I have to go to walk-in clinics because of the shortage of general practitioners. And yet, I work with the ITMD program, internationally trained medical doctors, where you have people who are field surgeons, you have people who work for the WHO, you have people who came to Canada, passed their examinations after studying in the Canadian system, but could not get the placements that they need in order to become full-fledged medical doctors. So we know that the barriers are there, and that internationally educated professionals face particular gaps that often their credentials are not recognized, which is why the work that Shamir does is so important. At the same time, we also know, as David said, that there's racism and there's discrimination that's embedded into many systems. So colleagues of mine did a study where they took the same resume And one had a name like David Jones, and the other had a name that sounded foreign. And it didn't matter where they were educated or what experience they had, identical resumes. If you had a foreign sounding last name, you were 30% less likely to get an interview in a large corporation and 40% less likely to get an interview in a small, medium enterprise. And people are often, honestly, they're often not conscious of how deeply embedded those biases are. Often they look, for example, for people who graduated from the same university. I remember being in an interview once, and someone applied who had a PhD from a second-rate Canadian university, and someone applied who had a PhD from one of the IITs in India, which are top-rated institutions in the world. And people on the interview committee didn't know, like they didn't know that there were universities in India that were more highly rated than MIT or Harvard in the United States. So you know, some of it is ignorance, some of it is bias, some of it is baked in processes. I would also say, though, one of the real challenges, you know, and I think this is an area where the settlement community has to do more work, is there are a lot of organizations that have shifted from providing community services for newcomers to providing employment services for newcomers, because there's money in employment services. And sometimes, frankly, they're training them for imaginary jobs. You know, we have English language programs that people are forced to sit through for months and months and months that don't teach them any more English than if they went out and drove a cab. So it's not just the employers. I would argue that we have to really push for changes within the entire system. And sometimes people don't tell newcomers what it is they need to be successful. There's a lot of nuance and subtlety around navigating, you know, what to expect in an interview, what people are looking for in interviews, for example. Interviews are among the most unfair practices in terms of recruitment and hiring, but they're part of the process. And so we have to equip people to be successful in those kinds of environments. So it's, you know, there are issues on both sides of the equation, on the supply side and on the demand side, I think. And we need to do a much better job with pre-arrival, with making sure people know what to expect when they come to Canada.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Shamira, I want you to unpack one thing that Wendy touched on, and that is a foreigner coming here with, take IIT in India or any foreign credential that Canadian employers may not recognize or may not give the same level of attention to. How does your organization help in that regard? And what's been the success that you've seen and heard from the evaluations you do?
Sure. So basically, World Education Services has been around. Most people won't even realize this. It's going to be 50 years in 3 years from now. The Canadian operation just celebrated our 20 years last year in October. And so the reason why WES was established was really to reduce the barrier of educational qualifications. So what I want to do is unpack a question you've asked me and differentiate between assessing academic or education qualifications and skills. And so when we look at academic qualifications, what World Education Services does is really look at somebody's degree or transcripts from another country and assess the documents against North American standards, Canadian or US, and give individuals a report that could be used for either entering the labor market, post-secondary education, licensing. And, you know, basically it opens doors. So if you have your educational qualifications. However, what we do know through all the surveys and studies we've done is that Canada is bringing in a very significant number of economic immigrants. West sees almost about 90% of those. Majority of these individuals have BAs, MAs, PhDs, and are professionals. And they would have been working in their home countries, sometimes up to 10 or 15 years. So they've got the experience, the depth of experience. And so, just to build on what Wendy has said, the issue isn't, in my mind, academic qualifications, because I've got the document. What is, in terms of the systemic issue, is how do I take the skills and experience that I have from my home country and transfer it to the Canadian context and be able to demonstrate that I could do the same job. I might just have used, different tools or terminology, etc. And it's complex. So, the example that Wendy gave is a real example where if somebody starts with the resume, and you look at something that's familiar, then you're going to put aside, somebody who basically is coming from an institution that you're not familiar with. But the reality is that more and more computers are doing keywords and key searches and pulling people in. And so, for me, the systemic issue is if employers are saying they have a talent gap, how are they assessing somebody's skills in a way that basically is coherent, fair, and not biased? And not saying just because somebody comes from a particular country, I'll discount that, because again, building on what Wendy has said, fully 50% of all our immigrants recently have come from India, highly, highly educated, and can contribute to the labor market immediately. They speak English, they're globally trained, and yet, they're the ones who are underemployed and unemployed. So we could discuss this more, that there are opportunities to move forward, but I believe that there is a systemic challenge that we need to think about moving forward with.
Great. Thank you, Shamira. Katrina, I'm going to punt this to you, and that is, in your experience in talent acquisition, people analytics, there's a traditional view or traditional process employers go through to screen talent. And it's changing, hopefully for the better. Can you give us your perspective on how traditional employers are maybe innovating the way they screen talent to maybe dig under their own unconscious bias and find competency versus the school they went to?
Sure. I want to echo for a moment what Shamira has said. I do believe that Canada is not very good at recognizing external experience, whatever country it can be coming from. I've also seen some cases of people who are coming from the United States, which is just across the border, and they're being told you don't have Canadian experience. And I just cannot possibly see how it can be any different, because United States seems to be, in my experience, much more faster in recognizing other experience and employing people much faster and making value out of their skill and their education, instead of making them idle at the back end, doing all these lengthy processes, to keep proving things where there is nothing to prove. You can just be employed and drive value. I also believe it's a twofold process. On one end, corporations and government and overall culture has to recognize people more, skills more, education more, and be more versed around the global level. Back to Wendy's example about Indian universities ranking much higher than some of the North American universities. At the same time, I want to caution people from falling into the victim mode, because also a lot depends on you. You picking up skills and you communicating, and you also calling things out right there on the interview. What is that magical Canadian experience that I'm being asked for? What exactly are we talking about here? So it comes twofold. One, employers do need to change certain practices and kind of open eyes, I would say. On the other end, people, there are much more of us looking for a job, many of us, and if we start calling things out, things are going to change. So back to your question, Daryl. Sorry for digression for a second. So back to your question, there are multiple practices on the bias elimination, diversity and inclusion, and exclusion elimination as well with employers. A lot of them come from automating process. Like, for example, a lot of companies now implement a practice of hiding the name on the resume, completely hiding the name. Some companies practice so-called anonymous interview, where they interview somebody and they don't see the person. Even the voice gets distorted, where you cannot understand whether I'm male or female. You cannot guess who I am. So we're only talking about experience. Or hiding certain first layers of experience, companies or education. So I cannot guess whether you're coming from Harvard Business School or you're coming from Moscow State University, right? As long as you have PhD in economics, this is what matters, and you have experience in particular way. There are certain artificial intelligence tools like Textio that help talent acquisition professionals to write job descriptions and make them sounding neither male nor female, more balanced, so all people can apply. As such is the rule and such is the observation that gentlemen, if they see they fit 25% of the job, they apply. Ladies, if they see they only fit 75% of the job, they don't. And I encourage everybody to apply as long as you fit approximately 70% of the job, because the rest gets picked up on the job. There are wonderful, beautiful tendencies, very strong tendencies on eliminating bias, bringing people in, doing bridging programs for employees. But I still do believe that's not enough, because there is still a significant percentage of people who cannot find a job, or it takes so unreasonably long for them to get a job. They get discouraged, they get underutilized. It's very debilitating to be underemployed and underutilized and unused in a sense, and not to bring value. I feel the process unreasonably long, and it's unreasonably cumbersome, because instead of making people make them learn all this long job process, we would rather have them already be employed, at least on a contract or some sort of probation period, and start adding value to the economy.
Great, thanks, Katrina. Dave, before I pass it over to you, I once again want to remind the audience that you can type questions into the Q&A box on Zoom. Dave, anything to add to that? And either on the employer side, how they can reduce their own unconscious bias, as well as on the newcomer side who are applying for meaningful jobs, how they can reduce friction and be seen more as Canadian, as opposed to have that bias act against them?
Well, I can only just say that all the points that my fellow panelists spoke to earlier are certainly valid, and this is what all employers should be adopting. I'm on the hopeful side of things, mindful of the many barriers that newcomers do face when they arrive in Canada. But I'll give an example of where some hope may lie. For example, in the tech sector, where in Canada we talk about Toronto as the Silicon Valley of the North, and we have tech jobs in Toronto, if not all across Canada, sometimes far outpacing what's happening in the US, in Silicon Valley, the San Francisco Bay Area specifically. And that happens as a result of we don't have enough. First of all, we don't even have enough talent to fill all the jobs that we're creating in the tech sector. And what that has caused is a mobility of talent from around the world. So many of our tech companies here in Canada and the USA are, recruiting individuals from countries that may be far away. And the government of Canada, for example, had to adapt with by introducing, I think, the global talent stream that allows for that easier mobility of talent. And tech, the tech sector, by nature, one that is built on a culture of innovation and disruption. If you talk to tech recruiters, a lot of people working in tech may not have even pursued formal credentials in tech, may not have had a background in computer science. A lot of people are also self-taught. So a lot of these skills are just, acquired on their own doing because of passion and experience, etc. And that's what the recruiters seek out. So it's not about where you studied, whether that be the particular university or the geography you may be coming from or your language capabilities. The focus becomes, can you do the job? Yes or no? And are you passionate about this? And, I think the pressures from tech, and as companies, for example, RBC, big, long-time employer in Canada, Dave Mackay will tell people RBC is not just a bank, it's a digitally enabled company. So you may not call it a tech company, or may not call it just a bank, but certainly a bank that is digitally enabled. And as tech skills become, as there's a greater demand for tech skills, I think recruiters and organizations are going to feel those pressures that they need to adapt their processes. The other bit is just, when we reflect on the the inherent biases that are sometimes built into our processes when we think about systemic change. So yes, there is just that bit around, and not just anonymizing the name and different parts of the resumes. As Katrina was speaking to, and Wendy, it's not just on names that you may find that bias is being elicited. It can come from the particular university you studied at, the particular program you pursued, previous employers, right? There's a big difference if someone worked for, let's say, a Shopify and a Google as opposed to a smaller tech company. There is a bias and assumption there, and I get that from some of my clients too. But so, anonymization plays an important role there, but that's just one step of the process, as I'll tell clients. We have to think about the entirety of the recruitment process. So the point at which a job description is being made to the point at which you even select the candidate. And how do you think about the biases at each stage, and what are some tactical things we can do to eliminate bias at that stage? The sourcing, for example, is critical. RBC and TD, banks, federally regulated employers that have been working on employment equity initiatives for quite some time are pretty good, and they have lots of resources that they can put towards, targeted recruitment efforts. So for example, they've been hosting recruitment sessions or just information sessions for particular population segments. And that creates that direct connection between, let's say, a particular segment, whether that's for women, persons who are of African descent, the immigrant community. And you need that. You need those informal connections to help you understand what will happen in this process, what's expected, and how you can put your best foot forward. So we have to help employers to build that muscle in terms of, yes, understanding how bias shows up, and then really think about some tactical strategies to build connections to population segments that are facing challenges. Last point, I think one of the things that will create a natural pressure for employers in Canada is we have low fertility rates, low birth rates in Canada. And, the Century Initiative was something that recently came about. The goal is to increase our population to 100 million by 2100. And that will happen through two means: encouraging Canadians to have more children and immigration. And we need to increase our population, because if we have too many persons in our workforce retiring and we have very few persons entering, then we can't finance things such as, or pension plans and all the other services that the government will have to provide. So I think that natural pressure will happen in that, listen, we need to support and create pathways for newcomers into employment, because there are going to be some serious side effects from that.
Dave, I'm going to stay with you for this audience question, which ties into what you just said. Now, on the newcomer side, I think all the panelists have said systemic bias at different levels does exist, but microaggressions. So a newcomer going through the job process, the job hiring process, faces microaggressions at different levels. What's the right thing to do? Call it out, or laugh it off and don't say anything? What's your perspective?
Truth be told, there's no hard answer, easy answer to that one, and it will always be contextual. It will always depend on the comfort of the individual, and one could say it's going to be case. You have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. What I mean by that, there's an inherent power dynamic at play there. You want something that the institution, the recruiter, can offer you. You need a job. So your goal is not to walk into the process, into the interview, and cause the recruiter or any other member of the organization any offense. At the same time, you also don't want to feel diminished or degraded in any way. So you have to think about whether you have the skills or capabilities to handle that kind of response. Some will say, one way of dealing with microaggressions is to combat it with humor. You may find a way to redirect it, or you may just be candid enough to say, listen, that's inappropriate. I feel uncomfortable answering that question. And so it's going to be very personal in terms of how you respond. I would say to you, another way of looking at it is it could be an indicator that this may not be the place that you want to work for, right? I think when we think about the immigrant experience, there's a lot of pressure in that you've come into a new place, and because you have bills to pay, their realities, right? You'll have your family to take care of. So if you can get a job very easily, you want to take the first thing that comes. Well, we know that sometimes that's not so good, right? Again, respect for self, preserving your dignity and your integrity could also be very critical and important to you. So you don't want to sell yourself short, and don't just rush for the first opportunity because it may present itself. Because again, that is just even one part of the interview process. So, find ways that you can certainly start to prepare yourself to understand how you may be able to respond to microaggressions if you think they'll come up, and if you have experienced them already, and it stunned you in that you didn't know how to respond in the moment. I'd also say it's important for us to remind employers about the need to address microaggressions and the many ways in which they show up. So it was a term that was originally coined as, or focused on race per se, racial microaggressions from the Dr. Chester Middlebrook Pierce. Later scholars have looked at how microaggressions may show up with respect to different dimensions of diversity, whether that be where gender is concerned, one's immigration status, whether one has a disability, etc. So we also look at the need to help employers understand, okay, here are some things you need to be mindful of when you're going into this process and when you're engaging with people. It's not about being politically correct or telling you what not to say, but just being mindful of how it can cause offense. And, as employers, you want to attract good people. You don't want to lose the talent you're already trying to get into your organization.
Great, thanks, Dave. Wendy, Katrina touched earlier on the evolution of talent assessment, and not just focused on newcomers, just diversity that's being ignored through systemic blind spots. Can you share with us, in the research you're doing, what's working, what's not? How are these competency-based assessment screening tools coming of age? You're on mute, Wendy.
I need a t-shirt that says that. I'm a big believer in trying to introduce more fairness and objectivity into the process. So I do believe that one of the ways to reduce friction in the skills marketplace is to have better definition of skills, better assessment of skills, understand how to develop them, and then also utilization, because, as I've said before, some of the problems are on the employer side. And we do a lot of work, for example, looking at, employers are screaming for digital skills. If you unpack the digital skills that actually came out in an OECD study that was done recently, 75% of what employers are talking about when they say digital skills, it's not computer programming, not engineering, it's use of Microsoft Office and Excel, right? And so if you're not really precise about what it is you need, then you can waste a lot of time looking for a computer scientist when really you could take a smart psychology grad, put them through a 1-week course, and you'd have exactly what you need. So we're really, I believe you have to take that asset-based approach where we've had some good experiences. I can talk about them later if there's time. Where I think we have to be careful, and I'm, my PhD's in management science, I'm tech. Yeah, tech's great. Is that tech can also embed biases. So some of the artificial intelligence-based tools that employers are using in order to identify clients, if they're not really careful, they can simply embed the biases. Like, we've always hired people with these kinds of qualifications. Therefore, these are the qualifications that we need to look for in candidates. So I think we have to be careful about some of those things. I think interviews are basically evil. Psychopaths do really well in interviews, and if you're trying to assess certain kinds of presentation skills or sales skills or how someone presents themselves in meetings, like, interviews do tell you something that's useful. But what I've observed is very often people will be so enamored of someone's personality that comes through in the interview, they forget about their qualifications, and they can make big mistakes as a result. So I think anything that forces, and this can be technology, but it can also just be process. Like I've found myself in interviews saying, wait a minute, yeah, he told lots of jokes and used your name 3 times in every sentence and was very confident and groovy, but who cares? That has nothing to do with the job that we're looking for. Look at this other person's resume. And even though they were a bit formal and they didn't seem like a lot of fun, and maybe they were uncomfortable or they didn't understand the sort of cultural norms and personality stuff, look at their resume. They've got 10 times as many qualifications. So it's a combination, in my view, of using technology, but also using the human infrastructure that you have, being very attentive to your processes, being very attentive to who is making the decisions about who you're going to hire, being very attentive to where you're recruiting, right? Because if you're really serious about improving diversity and inclusion, you build partnerships with the immigrant serving organizations, with the BPPA, with organizations that are specifically focused on populations, Indigenous people. Because if you just advertise in the Globe and Mail, like, you're going to get the people who read the Globe and Mail. So to me, it's a very complex process of taking what I would call a gender and diversity lens to every single step of the process, even the job descriptions. Can I tell one story? I'm talking.
Sure.
Okay. I think I may have told this before, but the head of a big consulting firm came to me and said, we want your students to learn this application called PEGA, because there's a big demand for PEGA. PEGA is an AI-enabled application that actually allows people with very broad backgrounds to learn the tools. And I said, that's great. The problem is that professors don't like to learn new stuff. They don't like proprietary software, and it'll take you 4 years before you get any grads. But I said, there are all these computer scientists and engineers driving cab and working at security guards. I'll introduce you to the deans and you can talk to them about developing a new program, but let's look at whether we can teach something in short time. You interview the people, you pick the candidates, and if you're willing to say to me, I will hire these people if they get certified in PEGA, we'll do the training. And, they hired 100% of the newcomers that went through a 1-month training program instead of waiting for 2 years for the freshly minted Canadian graduates. So it's getting people to think of innovative new ways, on-site language training, things like that, all can really add value.
Thanks, Wendy. I love what you said, that psychopaths make for great interviews. I got to pass that on to my HR team. Just watch out. Shamira, I know Wes has done some competency-based research. Anything to add to what Wendy's just said?
Sure. We've done a lot of research to try and understand whether actually competency-based tools exist around the world and whether employers could use these tools. As Wendy has said, as Katerina has said, Dave, that it's complex, that you could have all kinds of tools, but the execution of those tools make a difference, right? Because the tools are there. It could be anything from paper-based to, virtual to in the workplace. But I'm going to answer the question slightly differently in terms of trying to disrupt the processes we have currently and moving away from a traditional approach to something that's totally different. So when we talk about the concept of Canadian experience, it's elusive. Like, what does Canadian experience mean? And if you actually unpack that, what that means is, I don't understand your experience from country X, and I don't know whether you're going to be successful in the workplace, and I'm taking a risk. And when I take a risk, I'm not going to make any money. I'm a business person. So I think that, if you were to ask me what's the way that we could innovate here and really disrupt things, what we know already is in Germany, they're very successful with what's called apprenticeship. In North America, we think it's all trades, but it really isn't. It's workplace-based learning. It's what they're doing in universities now in Canada, work integrated learning. It's what we do all the time, mentoring, internship in the workplace, because all the evidence shows that once you're in the workplace, within 3 months or 6 months, somebody knows what you can do. They get to know who you are, and you actually end up getting a permanent job, and then you get promoted really fast. So for example, in the Ontario Public Service, we started an internship program for newcomers, 6-month program, giving them a wage that was very similar to a new intern student coming in. And 98% of the time, within 2.5 months, 3 months, these individuals not only got hired permanently, they got promoted fast. And that's only because they were in the workplace. So, my perspective is that I know I've talked about competency-based tools, and we do need these tools. But maybe we need to take one step further and say everybody should do work integrated kind of learning, because it's going to be a win for the employers. They don't have to train and retrain because they went through a whole interview process and got the wrong person and had to start. They bring somebody in and watch them as they work. It's a win for the individual because they can actually demonstrate what they can do in the workplace while still contributing. And it's a win for the country because, it's pretty devastating when you have individuals who are leaving their home countries that have been highly successful. They're trying to be resilient, but as Katerina said, you end up with a situation where it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, you now take just any job to make ends meet. You lose your self-esteem, you lose your confidence, role reversal in terms of your kids, and then you just lose them. And in the meantime, the country they came from just lost their knowledge in terms of the people who are coming here. So I really believe that, we need to disrupt the whole system and think very differently. We've started it with our post-secondary students. We need to think about it for immigrants. Wendy, this is going to be something we're talking about next week at the session.
I love that idea, work integrated, sort of a job screening as a job screening tool. Wendy, on a scale of 1 to 10, Canadians don't like risk compared to other countries in the world, right? Anything that involves change is seen as risky. On a scale of 1 to 10, on embracing innovative systems to find meaningful work or find talent to find meaningful work, how far, what would you rate Canada, 1 to 10? 10 being they're just embracing everything readily, and 1 being they're just resisting everything.
5 to 6. And I think that's the average. So what you see is some organizations are very innovative and some are like losers. And so the average is kind of in the middle. But I have to echo what Shamir said. And my only regret about the federal government's work integrated learning program, and David, plug your ears, but Dave Mackay was very much the architect of that through the what was it called? The business higher education, whatever it was. It was designed for University of Waterloo co-op students. The people who need work integrated learning are not University of Waterloo co-op students. The valley of death for university students is when they graduate in a psychology or a history or an English or even a business degree, and they're looking for a job. Like that whole work integrated learning program, in my view, would have been much better money spent if they had designed it for university graduates, whether they graduated in Canada or internationally. And we've actually kind of gamed the system to take advantage of SWIP by enrolling students in things like ADAPT, which are non-credit programs, so we can open them up to newcomers and everybody else. They get registered as a university student so they can get the work integrated learning. But, I think that was such a missed opportunity. And we have the research to show that the people who benefited were not the people who needed it. And I agree like 100% with Shamira that work integrated learning is the way to go. That's how I got my first job, and it started me on my career.
It sounds so easy, doesn't it? If only. Katrina, I have an audience member pose this solution. Really, one of the spots in the hiring process. So, do panel interviews with a diverse number of people on the employer side, can that make a difference as far as reducing systemic bias? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, we can. Can we go ahead and issue $5 million to the person who asked this question, please? If anybody got the budget, I'd like to honor that person. Yes, it is. I noticed in my own experience when I led my businesses and my teams, the more diverse the interviewing team is, the better there are chances to hire more diverse teams. The more they were oriented on the local Canadians, the less the chances were. And I have to tell you my own personal experience. I was once interviewed for a job with quite a large company here by 4 white North American people. And I declined it myself because it was so incredibly hard to convince them. I almost felt that I was signed up for failure, that not only they were slicing and dicing all my experience and education throughout interviews, I felt it would keep happening throughout significant longer time. And instead of helping me and supporting me and believing in me in that job, which I sincerely believe I could do, and I could do an incredible job for them, I felt that it was very testy. So I felt I would be challenged constantly in the job, whether or not I am still the fit for this position. And you will not believe their surprise when I, on my end, declined the job because I refused to be signed up for failure. Yes, the answer to this question is big, huge yes.
Great. I'm going to stay with you on this, Katrina, but I want to give everyone a chance to answer this question. I'm going to ask for just one. I know there's probably many, and some have come up during this conversation. But if you could wave your magic wand, Katrina, and change one thing in our Canadian system that would improve the chances of diverse newcomer talent finding meaningful work, what one change would you make?
Can I make two?
No, you can only make one.
All right.
It's a magic wand, one only.
All right. I would like newcomers to be informed and somehow magically understand the realities of Canadian job search 6 months before they land in Canada. And by the time they arrive, I'd like them to have a plan and somebody support them to go through all the documentation and universities, what have you, to get landed in a job within 6 months, at least close to their initial profession, and make a government accountable for this. That's what I would like to see. Not long, cumbersome process, but make everybody accountable for people returning back to their career. I'm going to make a second one anyway. I'd like to take a hammer and break the glass ceiling and the glass walls of our employers perceiving people as not qualified without Canadian experience. Sorry, second one works also.
You managed to sneak that second one in. Dave, what about you? Your magic wand would do one thing. What would that be?
I'm a big advocate for systemic change. It's a big overused term, but I think it's where real change really does happen. And by that, I mean for our highly regulated professions, whether that be medicine, law, accounting, engineering, etc., I think they need to be required to really look at how they make the licensing processes a lot more easier, to make accreditation a lot more accessible and affordable, because these processes do take long, they can be costly, and then we know there's a real consequence called skills erosion when people aren't matched to their field of expertise and aren't able to put those to work immediately. So we've literally put up these unnecessary barriers in the way. People say it's to protect the profession, it's to not inundate it with too many professionals. But if we pay attention to what happened now as a result of the pandemic, we were almost at the brink of, we did exhaust our medical professionals, doctors, nurses, the whole gamut of persons involved in the medical field, in healthcare services, healthcare provision. They were exhausted. And the question has been asked, what happens if they were all burnt out and we really couldn't stretch them any further? And the reality is we have lots of newcomers here in Canada, you know, the taxi drivers in Quebec who are actually engineers, the security guards who work here who are actually medical doctors in their former country. So we were going to have to tap into these professionals to probably give us a helping hand. So it begs the question, why aren't they already licensed to practice their education, their field here? So we need to, whether that be through government mandate, that we force these professions and the regulatory bodies, the schools and the colleges to undertake the systemic review.
All right, we're making big dents here in the system. Shamira, what would you do with your magic wand?
Well, Katerina and Dave took my answers away in terms of the magic wand. So maybe I'm just going to build on what Katerina has said, is that what I would wish for is that we have systems, tools, and processes in place for individuals to get their assessments while they're still overseas, including skills, so that they can hit the ground running as soon as they come to Canada. They know what their skills look like. They basically have almost like a skills passport, which will be their education credentials, digital badge, skills, and they know where they stand. So while they're getting ready to basically come to Canada, they can start applying for jobs. Employers look at the skills passport and the portfolio. They'll say, I know what you can do. They land, and within 2 months, they have jobs. That's my magic wand.
Wonderful. And Wendy, I'll give the last magic wand change to you. And you're on mute again. That t-shirt. I'm going to send you a t-shirt, Wendy.
It's a hard one. I think, for me, accountability at all levels is critical. You get money from government to train people for jobs. We're going to assess you based on how many people you place in jobs, not how many people you train. You're a large corporation that pretends you care about diversity and inclusion. We're actually going to hold you accountable for your progress. And I would like to see more regulation, more accountability, and more money being spent on things that work. And I will just say that in Canada, governments are loath to, they will invest in new programs, but they're loath to kill things that don't work for a whole variety of reasons. And I don't understand why fiscal responsibility is viewed as a right-wing agenda. I mean, in my view, anyone who's progressive should demand accountability so we spend money on things that work.
It really does speak, Wendy, to our very conservative culture in Canada on all fronts, not just changing our systems that we're talking about today. Jemima, I'm going to pass it over to you to maybe summarize some of the key takeaways you heard during this conversation.
Thank you. So it was really great to hear all these insights from these wonderful leaders and the questions from the audience. So mainly listening to all the panelists and the discussions, there is this, employers do seem to have a perception, which is seen from the resume screening to the interviews and recognizing the skills and talents. But also it's really heartening to see that there have been some steps taken towards addressing this, such as some of the things that were shared, the tools that are used to hide the name, some of the practices with interviews, things like that. And also the research that has been done and the data from the research that is being implemented, let me say, hopefully will make some changes. And the work that the West does with the credential assessment, then the work that the Diversity Institute has done and the insights has definitely made a big difference. And the suggestions about strengthening pre-arrival services so that when a newcomer comes here, they are ready, up and running with their skills assessed, knowing what they want. And I love the word, the skills passport. So they are up and ready to hit the ground and work. And the whole competency-based assessment and the integrated learning so that they are in the workplace and employers get to work with them and assess them. And that way, the barriers, the challenges, the whole Canadian experience piece, all those will be addressed, and Canada can definitely benefit from this immigrant talent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemima. I do want to emphasize one point as we close this session, and that is everyone, including myself on this panel, is a newcomer to Canada. And I would say, there's maybe not a direct path to workforce integration, but there is a path to it if you're determined enough. And everyone on this panel has shown determination in their own careers. I want to thank our event sponsor, Windmill Microlending, and you can find more information about them on their website that will flash on the screen in a second. And remember also that you can watch New Canadians on Omni TV or on YouTube or on their website, where you can sign up for their monthly newsletter to get updates about their upcoming Café New Canadians sessions. You can follow them on social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, as well as Telegram on the messaging app. One small request for those people viewing us on Zoom is on your way out, you're going to get a very quick short survey. If you could kindly fill that out, it really helps benefit upcoming content for Café New Canadians. I want to give a huge thank you to our panelists, Wendy, Shamira, Dave, and Katrina, for sharing your thoughts tonight. And man, I really wish some of your magic wand ideas come to fruition sooner rather than later. And to all the audience members, thank you for taking the time to join and asking your many questions. I'm so sorry we ran out of time and wasn't able to get to all of them, but it really has been an amazing session. I wish you all a great evening. Stay safe.